welcome to all of us. It's going to be an interesting task this morning. I'm assuming that everybody's done their homework. I certainly hope so. This is really complicated. It's been going on for some long time. And hopefully we can move the process forward a little bit. There are lots of important things happening in town that are tangential to this. They hinge on this, but they're not what we're about today. So I'm really hoping that we can keep ourselves on task and talk about the things that we're challenged with doing today, even though we have strong feelings and opinions about some of those other things. This is not this morning a forum for evaluating the wedge or for debating the most appropriate fire measures. We've got a specific task to work on. And specifically, we're asked to discuss which key values from your committee's point of view should inform the town's housing element update process. And from your committee's point of view, what priorities should the ad hoc housing consider as they work through the housing element update? So that's our job. We're going to be operating in the same format that the council and the commissions do, this webinar. So it's not like our own committees usually do, where there's a lot more back and forth with the community and many topics. There will be an opportunity for the public to weigh in at some point on the agenda, because it's important that we hear from them. And I think there's a way, I don't know what it is, Laura, that the people from the community who are here can tell how many people are participating. I don't know if we can see that or if they can see that, but I believe that from watching the councils, there is a way to do that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, what I'll do is under my name, I'll rename it to say the number of attendees. So right now there are 5 members of the public. So the people that are panelists can see that if you wish to. And I'll just update my name and try to keep that up to date if we can.
Okay, super. Thank you. And someone from the staff is going to be taking minutes. So our job's just to roll along here. We start with a roll call that Laura's going to do.
Rebecca Flynn.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, I'm here.
Scott Elrod.
I'm here.
Patty Dews.
Here.
Gary Hanning. Not yet. Fred Leach.
Here.
Judy Murphy.
Here.
Catherine McGill.
Here.
Ed Holland.
Here.
Michael Tomars.
This is MJ Lee. I'm substituting for Michael.
Great, thank you, MJ. Dale Fowl.
I'm here.
Bud Trapp.
Here. I'm here.
Great, thank you.
I'm here.
Got it, thank you.
Super. Thank you, Laura. So first thing let's do is just go around super quickly and introduce ourselves to one another. Many of us know each other, but just in case, try to do it in a sort of a 1-minute thing. I'll start as a model. I'm Judy Murphy. I'm chair of the Conservation Committee. Let's see. I'll just call on you because I see my screen here. Adrian.
I'm Adrienne Smith. I'm the senior planner with the town.
Bud.
I'm Bud Trapp. I'm on the EPC, Emergency Preparedness Committee.
Great. Laura, we all know Laura. I'm going to skip Laura. Catherine.
Catherine McGill, and I'm vice chair of the Conservation Committee.
Patty.
Patty Dews, I am chair of the Parks and Rec Committee.
Dale.
I'm Dale Fowl. I'm chair of the EPC, Emergency Preparedness, and vice chair of the Wildfire.
Ed.
I'm Ed Holland. I'm chair of Bicycle, Pedestrian and Traffic Safety.
MJ.
Oh, I'm MJ Lee. I'm a member of the Wildfire Preparedness Committee. I joined it in May, and I'm actually responsible for the wildfire tips.
Great. They're wonderful. Thanks.
Oh, thank
you.
I'm Scott Elrod, and I'm a member of the Sustainability Committee.
Rebecca.
Rebecca Flynn. I'm a member of the Sustainability Committee.
Fred,
I'm Fred Leach. I'm Vice Chair of the Trails Committee.
okay. Let's see. If, who else is here? Jeff is here.
Jeff Alfs, I'm representing the town council. I'm one of two members of the Ad-Hoc Housing Element Committee, along with Councilman Warnikoff, who is on her way. Apparently, she got into some traffic dropping her daughter off at school.
Okay, I see a square for Jeremy.
Hello, everybody. Jeremy Dennis, Town Manager. Good morning. Happy New Year's. Good to see so many of you today.
Thank you. And then I think that's it. Those are the people that I can see on my squares. Is there anybody that I missed? All
I
right,
think you got it.
then let's proceed to the presentation from the Planning Committee to sort of give us an overview of what's gone on so far and
I'm
where
sorry,
we are.
through the chair.
Yeah.
Judy, we do need to see if there's any oral communications, any
Oh, right,
members of the
thank you.
public.
Yes, thanks, Laura. All right, let's open it to oral communications. Those of you in the public who hadn't made it by the time I said this beginning, I'm going to repeat. Let's stay on task. Please talk to us only about things that are pertinent to this committee, because we can do absolutely nothing about things that this committee isn't charged to do. And of course, we welcome your comments within that basket. So you put up your hand and Laura can see you and she'll call on you.
We have Caroline Vertonghen.
Hi, Carolyn, welcome. Go ahead.
Good. Yes, I raised my hand earlier, but now I see it is being recorded. I hope you release that to the public. The public was not notified about these meetings. We all wanted to participate, and that's why you only have 5 people today. I don't think it's right. It should be advertised on all the communication platforms that we have. That's my comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. I think it was on the calendar and all the digests that went out, but I'm not sure. Anyone else with their hand up?
No one else has their hand up from the public.
All right, in that case, let's proceed to the presentation from the staff.
I do see Ed Holland's hand up from the
Oh,
committee.
sorry, he's not one of my little squares showing. I don't know how to get more than 12 squares at a time. Hi, Ed. Go ahead.
Hi, a very quick comment is that I do have a hard stop here at 9:30, so I will have to drop off the call. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll proceed with alacrity, hopefully, so that all of us can leave at 9:30. Okay, take it away, Laura.
Here's a presentation from Adrian.
Thank you, Laura, and welcome again to Committee of Committee members and members of the public as well. I just want to take a brief moment to restate the role of committees in the town's housing element update process as described in the staff memo included in your agenda packet. So we recognize that each town committee brings a wealth of specialized knowledge and experience viewed through the lens of their committee's focused work. And it's important that the town's housing element update process capture the unique experience and priorities of town committees. Again, today's meeting is the first of 3. And in this first meeting, staff's intent is to gather general feedback from this committee. At the next 2 meetings, we'll be presenting the committee with specific work product, meaning actual draft sections of the updated housing element, and we'll be asking you all to respond to that. So those meetings are still to come in spring and summer. So here's a look at the structure of the presentation. We'll start with a bit of background on the town's housing element update schedule, as well as the high-level basics of a certified housing element. We'll move into a few slides on town demographics to give you a sense of the town backdrop that this housing element is happening within. And we'll highlight a few key demographic groups in the community that have specific housing needs. I'll then spend some time talking about the town's actual housing unit obligation assigned to us by the state, and that this updated housing element must plan for. And then finally, we'll wrap with that committee discussion. So how is the housing element getting done? The main body charged with overseeing the housing element update is the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee. This committee was selected by a town council subcommittee and is charged with developing a housing element that complies with state law and is certifiable by the Housing and Community Department of Community and Housing Development, HCD, that reflects town values and goals and incorporates best possible planning for safety considerations. The town is also being guided by expert consultants, including 21 Elements and urban planning partners. Community outreach is a critical element of the update, and to that end, the town has hosted their first of 3 community-wide sessions. That was in this past November of last year. And of course, the Ad Hoc Committee of Committees has formed to provide its feedback and priorities to be passed on to the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee, and it will inform the housing element update. Here's a look at the high-level housing element update schedule guiding the process. So if you have a look at the far left-hand column, there's 4 main puzzle pieces that are all having to come together here, often in tandem as we move through this update. So we have community feedback, rezoning, the main housing element update process itself, and environmental compliance. So if you first look at the housing element update row in maroon, we're into winter 2022 now. So the current stage of the updated housing element is that we're transitioning from info gathering and analysis into actually beginning to draft the updated housing element. So we're moving in that direction with the guidance of the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee, as well as our town consultants. Regarding the community feedback piece in orange, the town's first of 3 town-wide community meetings happened in November, and we'll soon be planning for the second. And of course, we're in our first of 3 committee of committee meetings today. Next, to accommodate the new housing growth, the town will be looking at some degree of amendment to the town's zoning code, and we'll be looking into starting that process late winter, early spring. As for environmental compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, we haven't yet begun that, but that's upcoming, and we'll be starting that in the next couple months as well. So how do we get to a certified housing element? At a very high level, the town needs to develop a housing element, which is a plan for housing in the community, and it needs to be certified by the state. We have a specific timeline to do that and specific requirements that we have to meet. So here's a way to think about this process. The foundation of this process is the core town principle of community engagement. We layer onto that safety considerations, specifically geologic, seismic, and fire safety considerations. And then we need to meet a minimum state law requirements. And if we can do all that, we'll end up with a housing element that can be certified by the state. So there's a strong state legal backdrop informing the requirements of a housing element. State law requires that all jurisdictions have a housing element certified by the California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. And there are teeth to housing element law, and jurisdictions that don't comply can face a number of corrective actions, including fines and fees, funding disqualification from state funds, bonds, grants, and other actions. So the next few slides are some bits of town demographic info prepared by our housing element consultant, 21 Elements, and this data is pulled from the census. So we see here the population growth trends at the levels of Bay Area, County, and Portola Valley. Generally, the population of the Bay Area continues to grow because of natural growth patterns and because the strong economy draws new residents to the region. This graph gives us an understanding of Portola Valley's growth rate versus that of San Mateo County and the Bay Area. The population of Portola Valley increased minimally by 3.2% from the years 2000 to 2020, which of course is well below the growth rate of the Bay Area on the whole. The distribution of age groups shapes what types of housing the community may need in the near future. An increase in the older population may mean that there is a need for more senior housing options, while higher numbers of children and young families can indicate a need for more family housing options and related services. There has also been a move by many to age in place or downsize to stay within their communities, which can mean more multifamily and accessible units are also needed by the community. In Portola Valley, the median age in 2000 was 47. By 2019, that figure had increased to 51 years of age. More specifically, the population of those under 14 has decreased slightly since 2010, while the 65 and over population has also decreased somewhat. Interestingly, there has been a significant jump in the age 15 to 24 population. It could be that more college-age kids are moving back home due to affordability constraints. Another noticeable increase is in the age groups of 75 to 84 and the 85 plus populations, which could spell an increased need for multi-generational housing in the community. Understanding the racial makeup of the town and region is important for designing and implementing effective housing policies and programs. Since 2000, the percentage of residents in Portola Valley identifying as white has decreased. And by the same token, the percentage of residents of all other races and ethnicities has increased by 9.7 percentage points as of 2019. In absolute terms, the other race and Latinx population increased the most, while the white, non-Hispanic population decreased the most. By comparison, this trend has also occurred in San Mateo County, albeit at a much higher level of percentage point. The region's home values have increased steadily since 2000, besides one decrease during the Great Recession. The rise in home prices has been especially steep since 2012, with the median home value in the Bay Area nearly doubling during this time. Since 2001, the typical home value has increased 184.6% in Portola Valley, from 1.4 million to 4.1 million. This change is significantly higher than the change in San Mateo County and the Bay Area on the whole. So switching over now to dig into the housing element a bit further. The Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA, is a key driver of the housing element. Generally speaking, RHNA is a prescribed number of housing units at various economic levels that a jurisdiction must plan for. The current RHNA cycle the town is planning for is called Cycle 6, and that covers the years of 2023 to 2031. The overall goal is for all Bay Area jurisdictions to take on its fair share of the state's housing needs, and the Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, determines overall units for the 9-county Bay Area. The responsibility for assigning each jurisdiction's share of RHNA lies with the Association of Bay Area Governments and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. So those are called ABAG and MTC. Here we see the actual RHNA numbers assigned to Portola Valley organized according to 4 income levels. While above moderate income housing or market rate housing generally takes care of itself due to market demands, it's the very low and moderate income units that are more challenging to obtain. We see an overall base number of 253 units are assigned to the town. That said, all California jurisdictions are subject to the state's zero net loss law, which essentially requires that adequate housing sites be available at all times throughout the housing element cycle to meet a jurisdiction's RHNA for each income category. The town itself doesn't actually build housing, but it must make sure that there is a feasible plan in place, which is our housing element, that allows for the housing to be built. Of course, the town can plan for housing all at once, but despite our very best efforts at comprehensive market analysis and precision planning for our RHNA numbers, something might happen or not happen that we haven't anticipated, and we could fall short on our RHNA numbers. So how do we account for this unknown? We build in a buffer where we plan for more units than our baseline RHNA to try to account for the unexpected. So the best practice for a buffer percentage is 20%, and this is recommended as the minimum by the State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. This is a good contextual slide that helps us understand how the actual income categories are defined, and these are calculated according to the county a given jurisdiction happens to fall in. So we see here how the affordability levels play out in San Mateo County according to household income among households of 1, 2, and 4 people. So for example, if you look below the very low income category, second from the top, we see that two parents raising two children earning a combined household income of $90,000 would fall in the very low income category as a family of four. So RENA methodology starts with the State Department of Finance's population growth projection. And from there, a prescribed number of housing units is determined by the Department of Housing and Community Development. From there, ABEG develops the draft methodology in conjunction with a committee of elected officials. And their work is further informed by Plan Bay Area 2050. RENA numbers take into account jobs to homes ratio, proximity to jobs and education centers, expected job and population growth, as well as demographic trends that affect housing demand. So how to satisfy Portola Valleys RENA? As the town plans for this, we start with what we do know based on past development trends and upcoming projects. We know we have some potential affiliated housing units that could come to fruition with more units if additional partners are added to the program. Affiliated housing units are units located on land with an existing institutional use, such as a church or school or town hall, where those units are specifically reserved for employees of that existing institutional use. We're also estimating a number of ADUs will be constructed. And we also have a couple of pipeline projects, meaning projects already under application with the town that would theoretically meet construction phase in the next housing element cycle that we're currently planning for. Again, that's years 2023 to 2031. So known examples of pipeline projects are the Stanford Housing Project and the Willows Project, which is a supportive housing project. Both of these projects can be counted towards the next housing element cycle RENA numbers. So we know we have some unit potential in the hopper, but we know it's not enough units to satisfy our RENA alone. So how do we meet the rest? We look at varying land use strategies such as rezoning in order to feasibly meet our remaining RENA obligation. So what might our RENA allocation look like in practice? This is a partial draft projection based on the units we expect to see built in the town based on general market forces alone. At the top, we see our baseline RENA allocation of 253 units, and then our allocation of 304 units if we assume a 20% buffer. If you proceed down the chart, we're assuming a total number of 52 pipeline project units, and again, that would be the Stanford Project and Willow Commons. We're making an assumption of 80 ADU units will be constructed over this next cycle. And we have a rough projection of 6 affiliated housing units. So if we look down at the final row in red, we see that in taking into account the pipeline projects, ADUs, and affiliated units, we still have a 166 unit shortfall. So as mentioned on the last slide, we remedy this shortfall by establishing new zoning policies and identifying brand new sites with housing potential. And that's the process we're going through right now with our ad hoc housing element committee. So this is our last slide, and we'd like to move into committee discussion at this point. In terms of general structure, we're thinking about 5 minutes to be dedicated to each committee. And we'd like to gather your feedback from your initial internal committee discussions. We'd like to hear some of your high-level priorities and any specific questions or comments. And then from there, we'll go into public comments, and then we'll hopefully wrap with any additional committee discussion or comments for staff. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Adrienne. Let's go back to our shared screens. There we go. So we're each just going to take turns committee by committee here. And let me just start off by having someone volunteer if you'd like to start this process off. I think the general construct of 5 minute maximum, if you can get it in, and sticking to what your committee wanted you to bring to us. Let's go. Do I have someone to volunteer to start? Ed, thank you very much. Proceed.
Thank you. I mean, I think what I have to say relative to our committee is going to be quite obvious. We'd certainly be concerned about increase in traffic volumes, and our major priority that we've set over the last 2 to 2.5 years is that of pedestrian safety. So, what do we do to ensure that traffic volume increase and those things are managed in a way that doesn't compromise road safety in the town?
Very good. Thanks, Ed. Anyone?
Thank you.
Next committee? Dale.
We're going to discuss this at our next EPC meeting, but a couple of points. We had the consultant who was doing the evacuation study do a brief presentation at our last EPC meeting, and it was the highest attendance we had ever had at an EPC meeting. So there's tremendous interest in the community about everything associated with safety and fire. And the community brought up a lot of good points that the consultant had not considered, or certainly didn't have answers for at the time. And because we hold our meetings to a strict 1 hour, we had to cut things off. My big concern here is that, and in Adrian's second or third slide, she said that the housing element after the baseline town values become safety. Well, the town safety element is being written in conjunction with a housing element, and that appears to me to be wrong. We should be doing the safety element before we do the housing element. We don't have, I know the safety element will eventually come before the EPC, but you're not giving us any time to review it. I think it needs a tremendous amount of community input on the safety element, probably at least as much as the housing element. And that is my big concern.
Thank you, Dale. Good point. Appreciate your input. Have you considered having one of your meetings go more than an hour in order to accommodate this really serious thing? It's not, we're not in typical times right now.
Well, let me comment that real quick. The reason that we get some real quality folks, real quality volunteers to put their time in is that we keep our meetings short. I have to respect the time of the volunteers.
Yeah.
And so that's why we do it.
I'm envious. I wish I could keep my committee track like that.
Through the chair, Judy, given the importance of that question, would it be all right if I answer that in general terms?
Sure.
Okay, the town is also working on the safety element process right now. What we've done is we've prioritized elements of the safety element update that are important and inform the housing element, and we are actively working on those. So we are working on issues related to fire safety, evacuation, and other analysis of hazards that will impact the housing element update process. So we're pulling that information together and front loading that in the safety element update process. And we're using that to inform the housing element update. And then we'll continue on with the additional steps of the safety element. So we are prioritizing that safety element work and bringing that forward early in the process.
But my point is, you're not involving the community, and that is an absolute failure. Like I said, in evacuation, we had the consultant in the town. Residents came up with tremendous number of ideas and questions that the consultant really didn't understand or have answers for. And I think the same is on the safety element. You've had umpteen meetings on the housing element and 0 on the housing element.
Safety element.
Certainly those meetings that are upcoming will continue to inform the process. That's why it's so important to have these different meetings to get the feedback from the community. So we would consider that to be successful when the community members have new ideas that they bring to the conversation. That's what we're hoping for.
So Laura, I guess my question would be, say we are working on, you mean the staff is working on the safety element? And right now, considerable work you're describing, but it's all at staff level. So that a process similar to the one that we're going through for housing isn't happening. You envision that happening sometime later as opposed to now? Is that right?
It'll be a little bit different process. It's a different process than what we have outlined for the housing element, But yes, there will still be participation by the relevant committees, emergency preparedness, wildfire preparedness. So those committees will still have an opportunity and discussion to talk about these parts of the safety element. So
Got
we're
it.
just front loading the parts that are important for the housing element, but much more is to come. Much more is to come.
And I think I would say that I think Dale's point is well taken, and that is that to finish, to get 90% through the housing element without the safety element having been able to be chewed on by the community in the same way, perhaps not quite as many or over the same long timeline, but that it's critical to have all that done before ad hoc housing gets too far along.
Judy Murphy.
Anyway, Bud,
What's the timeline for the safety element? What is your timeline?
The safety element will also be completed by the end of this calendar year, 2022.
No, the timeline for the different parts. You're going to have community participation. When are these timeline for different points along the line?
The specific schedule hasn't been set yet. So we'll be working on the specific schedule and then releasing that to the public.
When will the schedule be set up?
It will be set up, I would say, in the next month or two. We'll be finalizing it, working through some of those details.
I think that's what Dale's after. He'd like to see some specifics on what your timeline is. Otherwise, if it's going to be done by the end, that's as he said, the cart has already gotten out of the door without the horse.
I find that completely unacceptable. If your plan is to be presenting zoning changes to the housing element by summer, we've got to have 2 or 3 meetings on the safety element before that's even considered.
Oh, Judy, if I can jump in here, this is Jeremy.
Yes.
So to Dale's comments, staff, I'll be a little repetitive here, but I want to focus them a bit. Staff has been working, so we have the same consultant working on the housing element and safety element, Urban Planning Partners. And the first stage of the safety element update, as Laura described, is associated to support the housing element update. That work has been going on with sub-consultants coming into the community, and on, what is it, the 18th or 19th, Laura? I'm gonna screw up my dates as I always do.
The 18th.
18th, the Housing Element Committee is going to, as we've been promoting in the community over the last week, will be discussing with 2 of our sub-consultants, Zeke Lundner from The Lookout and Community Development Director of Paradise, California, some of those initial findings. So that's ongoing. The safety element then will proceed with other elements that are not necessarily affiliated with the housing, portions of the housing element over the next coming months. So this was a council agreed upon strategy and approach. I don't know if the council members have anything to say here. We're very comfortable with the fact that we've prioritized that relationship, both because of state requirements and because of the incredible importance that those two elements have to one another. So staff is taking that very seriously, and I think people will be very pleased with the discussion at the Housing Element Committee next Tuesday. Thank you.
The
only thing, oh, sorry, Judy.
I want to say, I'll let each of the council members say something here right now, but I'd like to sort of pull it back to say that the organizational format here was for each committee to be able to sort of put in its 5 minutes, and then there's time for all of us to discuss everything that's on the table. So I think at that point, we could, all the committees could jump in and either support Dale or, do it so that in that discussion, the group's priorities will come up to the top. So as I move us on, I'm not doing it to diminish anything Dale has said, because I think it's critically important, but to try to just keep us bureaucratically on track so that we have the time to have the group discussion to support some of these ideas all of us think are so important. Okay, thanks. Sarah?
I think that is good comments, Judy, and I'll hold per your suggestion.
And
I'll do
Jeff?
the same.
Okay.
Same for
thank-
me. Thanks.
So thank you, Dale, very much. Next committee want to speak up?
I can do it, sustainability.
All right, thanks, Rebecca.
So sustainability had some preliminary discussions about this in our November meeting, and I wanted to share some of the thoughts that came up. These are not final in any manner, but they're just sort of preliminary. Sustainability obviously would like to encourage sustainable building processes in any construction that occurs, and that would include anything from passive building design to low embodied carbon, obviously higher insulation levels to create more energy efficient buildings, and all electric construction is very important for us. So if there's any larger scale developments like the Stanford redevelopment project, if that goes through, then obviously we would expect that to be all electric, and I'm sure Stanford would have no problem with complying with that. I'm sure that's in their plan anyway. The other area that we support is to allow denser housing along the main loop, because what's been shown for climate change is the more transit there is, the more driving there is, the greater the greenhouse gas emissions. And this is particularly important for the Bay Area because it's been shown and found that that driving contributes to an enormous amount of greenhouse gas emissions in the Bay Area. So whatever we can do really to reduce more car trips would be important as we expand housing. And that's a very difficult challenge for Portola Valley because it's hard to go anywhere without a car. And along that, so in that area, we would, as I've said, allow slightly denser housing along the main loop. We're talking Alpine Road, Portola Road. We would encourage expanding housing at existing communal sites, communal housing projects, whether it's at the schools, the Sequoias, the churches, et cetera. And we would encourage better public transit. So, whatever we could do to encourage to have Samtrans or Stanford to run a commuter bus along that main loop would certainly help. And another consideration for us is certainly equity considerations. So we would want to encourage smaller ADUs and junior ADUs over large, expensive guest houses and whatnot. We wondered, under that area, we wondered a little bit if there was some thought to doing amnesty for existing ADUs for unpermitted guest houses or junior ADUs that have been built in people's homes. Is there a way to give some type of amnesty that then would allow those structures to count towards our arenas? I don't know, but that's sort of a question we had about that. Under the sort of the equity considerations, is there any thought to creating a housing fund that would help lend money to projects so that homes that have large land but don't have large funds could then build an ADU on their property that could be rented out at below market rates in exchange for low or no interest loans or whatever that was. So the idea of helping people in our community who have large lands to install ADUs that might meet some of our problems with the very low and low income levels. And then as part of this, I haven't organized this in a particular way, but as part of this is also to encourage a greater variety of housing types and affordability. So we're talking junior ADUs, tiny homes, cottage clusters, pocket neighborhoods. I mean, is there a lot that would encourage having a lot of little cottages that would fit in with our rural kind of aesthetic, but then would have a few more homes that would have slightly greater density while not being oppressive to the rest of the neighborhood, if you will. And then finally, we have talked a little about small refinements and changes to the general plan and the code and the building code or the planning code. So there's some things that as these new ADU laws have been put in place and SB 9, et cetera, that essentially conflict a little bit with our current general plan. So we had a lot of questions, and I'm going to get to them next, but things like there's an 85% rule for construction on properties where you're supposed to build 85% of your allowable floor areas in the main structure and 15% would be for the ADU. So that, I don't know, maybe things have changed in the past year or two as these new laws have come in place, and I haven't personally followed up on that. But obviously, if we want to encourage people to build more junior ADUs, for example, then we would want more of a concentration within the main structure versus in the ADU structure. So maybe that 85% doesn't make any sense to continue to have that. Maybe it's just a burdensome sort of regulation that could be just gotten away with. I don't know. But that's the sort of thing that we need to, the town will need to look at. There's also sort of ideas from the more sustainable building processes. For example, we would want to encourage people to have more passive house type building, which says, if you want to have the most energy efficient home, then your best bet is to build 8-inch walls instead of 6-inch walls. So you want to add that 2 extra inches of insulation to the exterior of a home, because that dramatically increases the energy efficiency of your home. It reduces your need for the size of your furnace or your air conditioning, and therefore it reduces your greenhouse gas emissions. So what can we do as a town to encourage having people have thicker wall assemblies? Well, a simple way might be just to give those extra 2 inches, not count those extra 2 inches in your allowable floor area. So, I mean, these are super detailed things, but these are sort of small things that we want to encourage people. If you're going to be building larger homes or you're going to be adding structures to your property as you try to meet these reno goals, is what can we do to, encourage people to add the junior ADU, to add an extra space in their homes for a little kitchen on a bedroom, for example. Well, if you take off that 2 inches off the entire structure, it doesn't add up to a huge amount, but maybe it's 50 square feet. Therefore you have an extra kitchen that you can add. That gives you a kitchen that you can add to a bedroom that then becomes a junior ADU, and it doesn't have a big impact on the neighborhood, right? So those are kind of little ideas like that. And the last one I wanted to bring up, which maybe possibly is the third rail of Portola Valley, but it's the slope density rules. Whereas if your property's on a slope, you lose allowable floor area. Maybe we need to re-examine that, which, like I said, possibly could be a third rail. But when one looks at that rule, my understanding is that was going to put in place to discourage massive earth movement, because that then creates unstable hillsides. So if a project could what was such that you were not disturbing major amounts of earth, and that's based on the design, then maybe you shouldn't lose those 100 or 200 square feet, if the design was such. So these are small things that we should think about as we re-examine our planning code to see whether it still makes sense in the context of wanting to encourage people to build more within their property, but without having huge earth movements and without having enormous impacts on neighbors. So these are small things. So these are some of the ideas that we've been kind of throwing around and discussing within our committee. And then I just wanted to quickly go from there just to say a lot of the discussion as we were delving into this and sort of learning more about this whole process was that we all had enormous numbers of questions. And I'm not going to go through all our questions because I've sent many of them already to Adrian. But certainly topping them all off was our assumption is that there's going to be, the town is creating sort of a detailed list of all the properties in Portola Valley and is surveying all the properties for potential for an ADU construction. I assume we've got a consultant that's going around and looking at the neighborhoods, running a drone over the properties. I don't know what, but to be honest, our arena allotment of 300 is very, very little compared to our surrounding towns. I mean, I think Redwood City has like 6,000 or something like that. So we're at 300. We have, I don't know, 1,800 properties. You know, so what percentage of that 1,800 properties could accommodate an ADU, whether it's, you know, 300 square foot one, a little studio apartment, or it's a 1,500 square foot, you know, 2 or 3 bedroom one. We don't know that, and we think that would be really important for the town to just establish that. I mean, I don't even know how many properties there are that are 1 acre. I don't know how many properties in town are 3 acre. I don't, you know, so
I think there are maps of those things that are included in this voluminous packets. It's almost impossible to get through when you try to do your homework on this process.
Yeah, I mean, it indicates the zoned areas in town, but I don't know that I didn't look at everything from the past month. I looked at a lot back in November, but in the past month, maybe this sort of information has been released, but those are the sorts of questions. And the other question we kind of have is, how do you determine what category arena falls into? How do you determine if a house is a very low versus a low versus a medium? Is that the person who's submitting the application, the building application? Is it the town that determines that? Is it based on size? Who determines what, you know? So those are kind of the questions that we have about the situation. And then a lot of questions about what's considered a junior ADU. So those are things I think when the town answers some of these questions and puts it out to the community, it will bring a lot more clarification.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Lots of detail and thought-provoking comments there. All right. Let's see. Catherine, you have your hand up. Would you like to go next? Is your hand up on purpose?
My hand was up on purpose, but I'm happy to wait for the other person. That's fine.
Yeah.
Who else?
This is MJ. Can I go next? Because I have to log off in a few minutes.
Absolutely fine.
So the Wildfire Preparedness Committee has not actually talked about the housing element. So I can't speak for the committee on that point. We have been focused on home hardening, vegetation management, defensible space, and insurance coverage because Dale's on both the EPC and the WPC. He, he addresses the evacuation part, but since I've only been on the committee since May, I haven't really felt that the Wildfire Committee as a whole has had any input on the evacuation. So I'm not going to address that right now. Anyways, in December, as you should all know, the town council approved this new aggressive home hardening ordinance, and that's just great. I think as a committee, our next step is going to be trying to get more homeowners to actually do these things. Right now, you know, the home hardening ordinance only applies to new or housing or significant retrofits. And when I walk around town, what I think is maybe only 10% of the residents are actually doing any of this defensible space or home hardening. So we have a home hardening subcommittee, and we're working on developing a pilot project with a neighborhood and try to get that neighborhood to do all the defensible space and home hardening as a neighborhood, a joint effort, clean up the right of way and do a lot of things all at the same time. And then from that pilot project, we're hoping that we can get more of the townspeople to actually do this work. So that's as far as what I think we're going to be working on this coming year. Rebecca, you mentioned the slope density rule. Apparently, I guess, before I got on the committee, they tried to do something along those lines, and I guess there was a lot of pushback and they sort of dropped it. But we all know that slope is a big factor in wildfire, where you position your house on the property. So I guess if the safety element could address that, or the housing element, that would be great. Rebecca, you also mentioned that maybe a consultant is looking at ADU placements, or the neighborhoods or how they would be affected. If the consultant could also do that as far as wildfire, that would be very helpful because, there has been push from PVNU to get our committee to enforce or recommend to the town a 30-foot distance. First, it was a 30-foot side setback. And then Dale came back and proposed a 30-foot distance between structures. But knowing how people are affected, how many are affected, and on the smaller lots, what would happen to them. And I don't think it's acceptable to just say they can apply for a variance. I think it'd be better if the town had, understood what they would be putting residents, what kind of position they would be putting them into. So, yeah, if our committees could share that resource, that would be great. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, MJ. Catherine, should we go to you next?
Sure. So our committee did talk about this briefly at the Conservation Committee at the November meeting. And I think our focus at that time was agreeing with the general trend to have most of this additional housing along the Scenic Corridor because of the sustainability issues. But we've run across a couple of things recently where the parking was pushed all the way out to the road. And we would really like to make sure that we can incorporate some sort of vegetated setbacks along the Scenic Corridor, because while we understand a push to increase the development along there, it is a scenic corridor. And so we want to keep any new buildings consistent with that moniker, I guess. And then the other thing that's important to us is, the understanding that a lot of new ADUs are going to be built without the normal review process that we go through in town, but it would be much more of a ministerial across the desk approval. And we would just want to make sure that there's a well thought out checklist that we can apply that would allow us a little bit of flexibility in maybe situating or recommending siting of ADUs. So we just want to make sure that we don't get locked out of making some minor recommendations on those kinds of developments. Was there anything else, Judy? I can't think of. I think that was it mostly. Maintaining the scenic corridor, just remembering that the town charter, and remembering that the whole purpose for the town is being in harmony with the environment, and the housing element should be subservient to the environment as everything else in the town is, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I think our main concern was that there's this inherent conflict between increasing development along our main roads when our main roads are our scenic corridors, and then we get all wrapped up in the looking at buildings, looking at densities, looking at traffic, all of which are very important. And it's easy to forget, the sort of baseline integrity of what the town charter said, that we were set up in order to protect the natural environment here. So especially the only specific thing we came up, Catherine mentioned, is that on the scenic corridor, there's a setback for buildings. You can't build within 100 feet for a building, but there's no hardscape setback. And so if you really think forward to 10 years from now, and you think about Alpine Road and Portola Road having a lot more density, if all of those projects have been allowed to have their parking start at their lot line on Alpine or Portola, it's going to look like hell. Doesn't matter how many occasional trees they pop into their parking lot, it's going to look terrible. And especially along Alpine Road, the view of the Western Hills. The view of the Western Hills cannot be forgotten. It's sort of critical to the experience of driving through Portola Valley. Great. Okay, that's conservation. Next committee. Who would like to speak next?
Hi, Judy. It's Gary from Trails and Paths.
Hi, Gary. Well, thank you.
And thank you for volunteering to chair this important committee. And I have to apologize. I missed some of the discussion. I had to drop my daughter off at preschool. So I've been
We're
in
in
and out.
theory not discussing now. We're just doing reports out from the committees, and then we're going to have a general discussion period after,
Okay, great.
as time allows.
Great, thank you. So the Trails and Paths Committee has not discussed the housing element proper, but we have been having lots of discussions about ADUs. The Trails and Paths Committee looks at development plans. Historically, we've looked at all site development permits and conditional use permits with an eye towards minimizing impacts on our trail system. And so pressure from development on the trail system is nothing new for us. It's something we've been working to mitigate for a very long time. In the past, the tendency was to build structures towards the middle of properties, which helped mitigate pressures on the trail system because most of the trails are on the exteriors of the properties, along the property lines and the road setbacks, the easements. And now with the advent of more ADUs, what we're seeing is that there is much more pressure on those trails that exist in the road setback easements and along the peripheries of properties. And an example of that is the upper portion of Alpine Canyon Trail. Recently, a ADU was approved right along that trail, and a fence went up, and now we have pretty much lost that trail. A trail that existed since 1965 is no longer accessible to the public. And there's a big story behind that, and I'm not suggesting anybody did anything right or wrong, but what we did lose was the opportunity to engage with the homeowner. And I think that's where we do our best, is when we reach out and engage with homeowners about how to mitigate impacts on the trail system. And a number of folks already have touched on this, but the review process has been changed, and we're no longer seeing these development applications at the Trails and Paths Committee's level. So is that kind of, we miss an opportunity to engage with residents that way. So we've developed an ADU checklist, and we've submitted it to the town. And the ADU checklist basically encompasses all of the various things we've learned over the years when we've reviewed site development permits and conditional use permits relative to the impacts on the trail system. And you touched on something, Judy, that's I think very important, and that is the experience people have when they drive down the Scenic Corridor is just as important as the experience people have when they walk down one of our trails. And so if you're walking down a trail and you see nothing but homes, the experience is far different than if you're walking down, say, Shady Trail, where there are homes that back up to it, but you just don't see them. So there's a balance that needs to be struck. The more development that we propose in town, the more pressures there'll be on our trail system, and the balance needs to try to preserve the trail user experience. So we talk a lot about that, and our concerns certainly around increased density and building closer to lot lines is our focus, because we believe that will have a dramatic impact on the trail user experience.
Great, thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Judy.
Who would like to go next?
I can go next.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Patty Dews with the Parks and Rec Committee. Hey, one quick question. Are we going to get a copy of the slides?
Yes, we can provide them.
Thank you. That would be helpful. The Parks and Rec Committee hasn't actually addressed this in one of their meetings, but I think it fits in nicely with the conversations that we have on an ongoing basis. And that is the demand on our Parks and Rec facilities. And as we think about increasing the population of Portola Valley, we have to think about our resources from a Parks and Rec perspective. Do we have enough to accommodate those additional people? What demands will those additional people and resources put on our facilities? So that's something that we would look to, because we have limited facilities, as you know. The other thing would be we have a lot of space in town that is dedicated to parks and rec facilities, open space that probably looks very attractive to somebody who's trying to rezone for housing. And if we have to give up any of those parks and rec facilities, obviously it has a big impact, not only on our community, but on our surrounding communities, because we have teams from Menlo Park, from Palo Alto, from other areas that do use our facilities that pay us usage fees and that we depend on to utilize those facilities to their fullest. I got really excited when I saw the thing about rezoning. Actually, I got not so excited because I thought, you know, you might take away some of my facilities, but then I got really excited because I do have a self-serving need for a dog park. And I know Judith is tired of hearing about this. Jeremy's tired of hearing about this. Everybody's tired of hearing about this. But if we are rezoning and if we are thinking about different land uses in the town of Portola Valley, in the back of my mind, I'd love to think about a dog park that goes along with a nice housing facility next to a great soccer field. So just general overall demand on our resources and facilities, concern about rezoning and opportunities for rezoning. That's Parks and Rec, signing off.
Thank you, Patty, very much. Okay, next. Is there a committee we haven't heard from yet? I haven't got you listed by committees. If not, let me just add something in here that I thought the Equity Committee was going to have someone come to this. Is that not right? Because they have someone on the larger ad hoc, I know, but I thought they were going to send someone to this also. Is that not correct?
Since Equity has a representative on the overall housing element update committee, they didn't send a representative to this one.
So I sit on that committee and just want to say two super quick things. One is that when we've talked about it in general, there's been a great concern that we don't ghettoize Portola Valley, that we don't have some small areas that are where all the low income things go, and that would be a tremendous disservice to the social fabric of the community if we did that. And the other is that we need to remember as we go through the process not to conflate racial equity with income equity. They are different, and there's a tendency to speak about them in conversations as if they're the same, and they are not. That's all from Equity. Okay, so if every committee's had something to say, then let's move on to a general discussion. And I'd like to kind of semi-organize that by saying now's the opportunity for whichever committee you come from to weigh in on what you thought were the most important things that came up in the general discussion. And the three that I heard that sort of lifted up were the safety concerns and it came up in several different ways, although it wasn't called this, the degree to which things might be ministerially approved and exactly what that means, and our ability to influence that. My understanding is that before it was discretionary, which means it was subjective, and ASCC could kind of do whatever they want. You know, they said it was case by case, and then once it's ministerially, it doesn't mean that the town has to automatically. Laura, I look to you to correct me, but I've been quite concerned about this and reading a bit more about it. If it's ministerial, it doesn't mean that you have to rubber stamp what they put on your desk. It means that you must use objective and consistently applied criteria, which is why what Trails is doing in terms of making a checklist, if they get a checklist and it's approved by planning and approved by the council, then even things that ministerially get ministerial approval must look at those things on that checklist, so that to some extent, there could be other things than Trails things on the checklist. Is that correct? For example, conservation to say no tree more than X should be cut down within, 15 feet of this, whatever. That's a bad example because we may want to take trees for fire reasons, but as an example, is that correct, Laura?
Yes, ministerial approval has to be objective and has to be consistent. I think your words are accurate. And so there is a process we need to go through around developing any additional objective criteria that we want to implement with ministerial applications.
Right.
So it doesn't usually reserve flexibility. It has to be consistent, but it is possible to add objective standards around that. But I was wondering, Judy, if you wanted to take any public comments, and then we could come back to the committee discussion.
Okay, although the agenda I was sent had the committee discussion first and then the public comments. But I know that time is short, and so there's a little concern here about will we be able to talk about this among ourselves versus the
Well, we have 5 attendees. We have 1 person with their hand up right now. Maybe we could ask them to keep their comments brief, but then the committee would have the benefit of the public's comments.
Okay, yes. All right. So I agree. And I think it's really important that the public be able to talk, and they have a time limit, correct? So that won't use up the entire rest of the time of the committee. It's at your
discretion, but I could time people for 2 minutes and raise my hand when we've reached 2 minutes.
That would be good. Normally, I don't like those time limits, and I don't do it in my committee, but I think now for all of us, the importance of what we're doing, let's do that. So who has their hand up?
Karen has her hand up.
Karen, all right. Welcome, Karen. Thank you. Someone in charge of unmuting her. It's not me.
Karen, you should be able to, there you go.
I just wanted to make, this is Karen Vatra. I just want to make a quick comment on MJ's comment about the slope, and in response to what Rebecca was discussing, because it's kind of important. The slope thing has not been dropped. WFPD process with the fire code is very different than changing our building code, which is part of the town. The fire code involves San Mateo County areas and involves Woodside, and members of the public have commented about the slope recommendation of 200 feet being cleared being a little onerous. So yes, there is some people who have not completely supported it, but every agreement, every law that gets passed is not 100% unanimously supported by them. Slope greater than 30 degrees has to be 200 feet. And the 30-degree slope is pretty important for fire, because not only is your structure at risk, but also, honestly, the fire folks can't approach a steep slope like that. It's just physically too dangerous if the fire is there. And so that's kind of where I actually came up with that data, because they simply can't be there. Their suits they're not going to keep them safe. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Anybody else have their hand up, Laura?
Yes, Caroline Vertonghen.
All right, Carolyn, go ahead.
So much. I was not ready to, I was still writing my notes to keep it brief, but first of all, thank you to all the residents who volunteer on our behalf. A few have a different path, and so I want to reiterate and reconfirm, we do have our governing documents that were established in 2015, and unfortunately, we see over time and time over that our town council and staff have not been following guidelines, especially on public safety. And believe me, many of us have brought this to the attention on a variety of issues, and we continue to be ignored. So we continue to hear that town council has public safety on the top of their list. But if you just look at the list of priorities in the last 5 years, public safety is not on that list. Housing, yes, housing is on the list. And we want to protect our values. We want to protect this beautiful town. And we have established a governing, we have established governing guidelines by establishing these committees by volunteers and by residents. We have also noticed that many of the committees, people leave because there is no progress. And there's many new residents that have that are now sitting on these committees, but they don't know the history of what is in town. So, Mrs. Murphy, we really appreciate and other people like Mr. Pfau to fight for us, and we will continue to fight for you because it is important that we keep this town as it is, even with change. And that is what is so wrong, because our handbook and the general documents prepared for change. It's just that the town did not follow the guidelines. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. Anyone else with their hand up? Okay, let's proceed then to some discussion among ourselves. And let me go back. I'd sort of started this, lost my track. So on the ministerial thing, I think then rather than spending a lot of time discussing it now, the idea would be that understanding fully that there can be checklists where things can be applied to these ministerially approved. It might be wise for each committee to go back to its committee meetings and say, what might we want to have on this checklist? What would be rational and reasonable for us to put on this checklist so that the town, while ministerially approving things, will be sure to X. And I think that's an important thing. There's always this talk about, that the community and its residents aren't having enough input into the process. And this is one way for us to really make sure that even at the ministerial level, the things we care the most about are being paid attention to. And I know that's kind of a pain in the ass, Laura, for the planning committee, but I think it's probably a very important thing. And I don't think it needs to be huge. I think each committee will have a couple of things probably if they weed it down. So that's one thing. Then back to safety. I think Dale brought up the safety issue, and I think almost all of us agree that there's nothing more important than safety. And so there's global agreement about it. The issue seems to be, how's it being actually dealt with? What are the actual steps being taken? And maybe before I had sort of, both Sarah and Jeff were waiting to talk. So before we go into that, would either of you like to say something at this point? Jeff?
I'll start if that's okay. First of all, thank you all for being here. Thank you to the committee members. Thank you to the public for offering all these things. There's a lot of good input here, and I really do appreciate it. And I've taken a lot of notes, and we're incorporating it as best we can. Just first of all, I think every set of council priorities in the last 5 years or longer has included safety. We've never not included safety among our annual priorities. I mean, 3 years ago, we started the Wildfire Safety Committee to see what else we could, as a town, be doing to make the town safer. That's on top of the work we do every year with Woodside Fire Protection District. The idea that this is not important to us is, I'm sorry, it's false. We're doing the best we can. In terms of the question about the safety element, I'll point out that we are honestly waiting for material, for example, fire maps. We were hoping to have fire maps by now. We don't know when we will have them from CAL FIRE. That was an important piece of information, one of several that we would like to have in place before we put together a detailed safety element. Nobody likes the timing of this. It's not ideal, but the fact is we're doing the best we can. We've been given a timeline, and a lot of the information and things we need to complete the task have not been given to us yet. It's frustrating. I hear you. I agree with you. It's not an effort to minimize people's participation in this. It's not an effort to, we want to hear from the public on it. It's absolutely important that we hear from the public on it. We're organizing this kind of on the fly as information from other parties comes in. We're dependent on other people who are frankly behind their schedules. COVID didn't help with this, but a lot of other things have delayed it as well. And, I apologize for that. We're doing the best we can with that. And it's not a question of not wanting to hear from anyone about this. It's not a question of not caring about safety. It's a question of the logistics of this have been difficult and frankly compressed. And I don't like it either, but thank you again for your patience. We do want to hear more from you. This was a very helpful discussion. And I'm I'm looking forward to continuing. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. Sarah, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, just to augment that, I think all of you are very active volunteers. So I'm probably preaching to the choir, but again, the timelines are mandated from the state. And so we're in reaction mode based on that. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that. As far as the maps, yes, we're waiting for the maps. The town is also looking into a variety of different ways to get at even better maps. And so that's coming into play here. One thing that two things actually that I wanted to say is what I'm really focused on this year is trying to make sure that everybody is aware of the things that are going on in town. Because I feel like I'm having a lot of individual conversations with people about transparency in these processes. And I feel like the town is doing a lot, but people are just missing the memo, so to speak. And so we're working really hard to try and do a better job at communicating. And one thing very relevant to this committee and this meeting right now is the housing element meetings that we've been having every month, where all of these things have been discussed. We've had very low attendance from the community, from members of the community at these meetings. And I'd encourage, all of you to help us get the word out, to attend yourself as you're able to, or watch the recordings and read through the information that's posted on the website. We have all of the agendas, all of the Zoom recordings, all of the meeting materials posted there. The meeting that is coming up next week in particular is super relevant, and we really hope that we get, high attendance at that meeting. And I guess, I have heard from a few people today that your committees have not had the chance to review the housing element topics in your committees. And I really, that to me is something I'm just kind of flagging to take note of, that I really think, how can we help you kind of get the information you need to discuss this in your committees? Because we have been working on it and communicating about it for the past, I don't know, Laura, 4 or 5 months, I think. And then last, Laura, I don't know if there's anything you can kind of reiterate to share about what I know there's moving targets on the safety element process because of the dependency on this external information. But I know you have been working on it and have plans of, when generally it's going to be coming up within the process, and what your thoughts are about what the public input opportunities will be. So maybe you could reiterate that at some point in this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So I think I would say, staying on safety, that the sense that it's important to get the fire maps, et cetera. There's a process that's usually followed that makes the most sense. But there's, with this, the level of concern in town, the optimum time to have the first community meeting would be after you have the maps, et cetera. But with the amount of concern that's built up in town, even though it's not maximally efficient, perhaps it would be wise to schedule a community meeting on the beginning of the safety element to do and draw out that little thing you drew for us, the 4 lines, what's happening at the planning level, what's happening at the meeting level, what's happening, and have a timeline so that the town could A, see your timeline, and B, participate in an open discussion, even though they don't yet have all the facts. So in a ways that's stupid. It's not what a business would do, and it's not what you would do if you were running your own little place. But in terms of the concern that exists in the community and the complaints you're hearing, justified or not, that they're not having input, it would diffuse that. And so I think it might be very important to be inefficient at this point in that small way. Because I think Dale's point that people are feeling freaked about safety and feeling like it's not at the front of the list for the town. I think those of us who follow this closely see that the attempt is there and understand the bureaucratic timelines, but this is sort of outside of the usual bureaucratic thing. And I think the community would be well served if you would make an exception in this point. And Dale, would you like to say anything more about that, or what you think would lower the concerns of you and your committee?
No, I agree, Judith. I mean, I was just looking at the timeline for coming up with rezoning recommendations in the housing element, that's coming up in a few months. And from my perspective, we can't have a first meeting of the safety element, just a few weeks ahead of when you're going to consider rezoning elements. I mean, we've got to start much, much sooner. I bring up the example of the evacuation consultant at my committee meeting. And, we're supposed to have the results of the evacuation study here at the end of the first quarter, and that's coming up in a couple of months. And the public comment was really, really useful. A tremendous number of ideas, questions, thoughts that had not been considered, the consultant didn't have answers for at that point, were brought up. So I think it's really important to start getting this information out there and listen to the community, because there's a lot of better ideas. I am not comfortable just having a bunch of consultants come in and say this, that, and the other thing. I think the community members, this was the first time I had heard about the issue with the trails. That's really salient information as we think about safety and the rural character of the community, particularly in the safety element. So I reiterate what Judith is suggesting.
Okay, thanks. So is there anyone else want to say something about safety that hasn't yet been said?
So this is Gary with Trails and Paths.
Hi, Gary.
So I would support both yours and Dale's comments with regards to accelerating the start of the discussions for the safety element. There are components related to trails and paths. Certainly when new development proposes to place things like compressors, mechanical equipment, lighting, things that make sudden noises that can spook equestrians. There's a number of issues relative to safety development and the trails that we would like to see addressed. And I would also just make another comment that timeliness is really important with this stuff. We submitted our ADU checklist to the town in July of last year. And to our knowledge, it's still not being used. ADUs are being approved without the use of our checklist. So we'd like to see a committed timeline for these things to be implemented relative to the review process and the safety considerations of the trail users.
Thanks, Gary. Okay, anyone else want to make comment about safety? And if not, it might be the time to start a staccato, since we're really at the end here. Specific questions for the staff. Might it be better, Laura, would you like us to submit those to you in writing and then they all get collated and we all get to see the answers? Or do we have, we're really coming up close here to our ending time. Should you want to take one or two questions right now? But I think when we end, and we should end in a timely way, I'm absolutely in favor of Dale's philosophy about that, that shouldn't cut off the opportunity to do this or to close the loop. So that I think the important thing is that about this committee is that we're all hearing from one another and what one another's priorities are and how they might mesh with ours so that we can get more unified in our approach to some of these or support one another's initiatives. So I'll start off with one question, and that is, what determines if a project is RENA? If the RENA doesn't start till 23, how is it that things that are approved now can be counted then? What's the timeline for that? How do we know? Is it like everything going forward gets to count in 23? That seems a little nuts, but I hope it's true.
There's state guidance with a cutoff that talks about if things are in certain phases of the development process. So we're estimating that to the best degree that we can, but there's state law guidance that allows us to do that starting in the summer of 2022 to count it towards the next cycle.
Got it. So the Willows, which has been approved now, how can that count? That won't count towards the new one because it's done.
Willow Commons has been approved by the ASCC, but the trigger for counting it is related to the building permit. So it has to do with the timing of their building permit submittal.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Other questions?
Yeah, I had a question around tracking how ADUs in particular would be applying to the quota, particularly for income. I know of at least one example of a homeowner using the ADU process to effectively just expand their own home without any plans for anyone occupying that ADU other than the existing homeowner. And I'm curious how, given that ministerial review is happening, how is the town sort of tracking and potentially preventing against this sort of abuse of the law?
So this is a very complex area, actually. And the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee discussed this at length, so we can refer you to that discussion so you can see the details. In general, there's a formula that's applied that's used regionally, but it's a very detailed conversation that we can point you to.
Just to add quickly to that, Fred, you're completely on point. It's a black box, and it's far from exact science. And the fact is, we follow the guidance we get from HCD in terms of, I mean, HCD basically has a, like Laura said, it's a formula. We know that ADUs are being built not occupied. You know, we're sort of following the guidance because we don't have an easy way to come up with guidance of our own. And frankly, the HCD, I think, privately acknowledges that they realize that's happening. If I had to summarize their response to that, is that they feel like even if the house is not, even if the ADU is not being rented, it's still sort of its inventory that's out there, and someone in the future has the option of renting it. And they're basically, to them, it's sort of like building up housing. I'm not commenting on whether it's appropriate or not. I'm saying that I think that if I had to summarize it, I'd say that they think that as long as the building's there and it could be rented in the future, it's inventory, and it's better than nothing. I completely agree with you that it's not. I mean, we don't, you know, the impact it's actually having on the housing prices is debatable. We're following the rules, and there's just, I wish we had a better option for doing it. And frankly, I don't believe we do. And I've been thinking about this for the last decade. So, you know, I'll defend staff and even to some extent HCD on this. It's just really complicated.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Anyone else? So unless there's something.
Judith, I had a question.
Yeah.
What struck me about this conversation, and it probably should have considered before, is to the extent that we have the HOAs involved. I mean, HOAs as a committee, should they be part of this committee? So as we talk about ADUs, as we talk about rezoning, as we talk about density, as we talk about, you know, housing elements, it would seem like the HOAs, we have one at PB Ranch, we have one in Ladera, we have one in Westridge, should be involved, if they aren't already, in this conversation, because they've got a lot of, you know, skin in the game, so to speak. They've got a lot of information. They are approving building, et cetera, et cetera. So just a question about, to the extent that we're involving what I would consider to be a critical part of our community.
Okay. I don't have an answer for that. I'm not sure, unless there's a quickie. Laura, you want to?
There's not a really quick answer for this. The outreach plan doesn't expressly reach out to HOAs. We are in communication with the HOAs regularly through my staff and our department in planning and building. But we'll think about your comments more, Patty. We appreciate this.
Thank you.
Okay. So to wrap up then, I guess the big question is, have we accomplished what we hope to accomplish and what the town hoped that we would accomplish? Did we have enough time to discuss one another's ideas? Did you have enough time to get your questions answered? What's next step? I think as far as I know, this is kind of it for the Committee on Committees. Is there one more meeting planned, Laura, at some point for this committee?
2 more meetings are planned for this committee. So I would say this: if you have specific questions that are coming from you or from your committee, you can send those in to Adrian and myself. Questions on this process, it's the easiest, probably can go to housing@portolavalley.net. And that comes to us. We'll compile questions and include those in FAQs, or if there's a bunch of questions that come from this group, we'll release them back out to this group so that you can share them with your committees. then we're going to take this feedback. This meeting is being recorded. We will post this recording to the website, and we'll have minutes developed of this meeting. We'll share those minutes with the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee so that they can hear your priorities and ideas. We'll take your feedback into consideration as we're working with the council subcommittee to move forward on how we're working on these plans. And then we'll have, for future meetings, we'll have more concrete or specific things that we're going to ask your feedback on. So for those meetings, we'll be producing more of like an agenda packet. We will give you information in advance that we're going to ask you to review and be prepared to provide feedback or comments. Your individual committees are going to function differently around this, and we honor that, respect that. So you can either have conversations with your whole committees if the timing lines up, or the committee can just give you authority to speak on behalf of the committee. If you want to have additional conversations in your committees, we support that. If we can provide you with different additional materials to aid in those discussions, please let us know. We'd be happy to help facilitate those conversations. So that would be kind of my summary in terms of next steps. Are there questions around next steps?
Approximate date of our next meeting?
We'll have to look at the schedule to be sure. About 2 months from now.
2 months.
And my question is, can we get those packets ahead of one of our meetings so that we can discuss it with the committee, with our committees?
The timing, it might be challenging because of the timing of putting all of the pieces together, but we will certainly do our best to do that.
Yeah,
You might give us a rough, not the perfect package that would go out in terms of the completed materials, et cetera, but a rough in terms of the topics and the, a paragraph about the topic.
That's helpful. Thank you. Yeah, we'll try to do that.
Not just one day ahead.
Right. Before, ideally, close to a month before, because the committees are on rolling schedules and yeah.
I think
general sense, planning is a general sense of what we're going to be talking about as you go along anyway, even though you may not have the packet together. Sarah?
I just wanted to also say, of course, always the ongoing Housing Element Committee is open to all committee members to participate in. So there's always that opportunity as well. You don't need to wait for this other meeting.
And the webpage that the town has for the ad hoc, for the housing element revision is really very deep in terms of what's there. These presentations have been given are there in multiple forms and multiple parts of the page, and it takes a long time to go through it all, but it's all there if you want to really do your homework. Catherine,
I have a quick comment about that. There seems to be some sort of disconnect on the resources page on how you come into it, because there is a presentation when you go in one way, and I'm not sure which that way, but the presentation has a bunch of maps. It has the fire map. It has the number of properties that have another, you can have an ADU on it. It's got the geological stability map, and I think it has the fault map, and that would be really helpful to have that be much more prominent, because I just stumbled on it, and I think it's a wealth of information that would really allow us to look at the town as a whole. Each of us to look at the town as a whole, and so I just want to make sure that presentation is pulled out and made a little bit more prominent so people can see it, because it's really helpful.
That's right. I think specifically, if you go to the housing element update button, that's a major presence on the web page's homepage. If you go to that directly, among its resources, there are things that are not there in the resources that you can find if you go to the ad hoc committees, minutes, resources. There are some gems hiding in there that really should be also in the housing element update resources directly, so you can get directly at them. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. I think that's it for the day. I hope people are feeling like, both you made a contribution and you got something out of it yourself. And we look forward to the town responding to the concerns that we brought up and we'll all meet again in 2 months or so, evidently. Thanks very much. I'll adjourn the meeting.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Take care.
Judith.
Thanks, everyone.